Problem-solving behaviours. How do you solve your problems? And what about your kids? Have they learnt problem-solving skills? Let's look at the different MBTI personalities' natural problem-solving preferences. I'm an extrovert, and I like to talk my problems through out loud. Actually, many times often, without being asked. This helps me to process and share my thoughts, and allows others to give me feedback that I might find valuable. Sometimes not, but that's okay. I'll listen and then do what I want anyway. I love to brainstorm in a group setting where everyone has a chance to share their thoughts. My husband, Paul, is an introvert. He reflects on the problem and will brainstorm internally. This process allows him to think and clarify his ideas before he begins talking. Sometimes he doesn't externalize his ideas or thoughts unless asked. Do you express your problems and discuss them with others as your way of processing them? Or do you work in your head and internalize your ideas, problems and thoughts? I'm also a sensing type. I like to start my problem solving at the very beginning and build onto that process. I like to conform to standards, what's working now, and look at what could go wrong and implement specific steps of solution. I really question change sometimes when things are running smoothly. Really, why invent the wheel? On the other hand, my intuitive friend looks for meaningfulness in facts, the relationship and the possibility of future events that can be imagined from these facts. She enjoys developing new and original solutions to problems rather than using what's previously worked. Which most aligns with you? Now, my family all share a thinking preference, and they use logic and analysis for their problem solving. They value objectivity, and they tend to be impersonal when drawing conclusions. They want solutions to make sense in terms of facts, models, or principles under consideration. In contrast, I have a feeling preference, and I consider values and feelings in the problem-solving process. I'm very different to them. I'm subjective in my decision-making and always considering how my decisions might affect other people. Now, as a family, we have very different points of view when solving problems. Not right or wrong, just different. And many times we just disagree and go on the best solution that's for the problem itself. So where do you sit? What do you look at first when solving a problem or making a decision? Logic or values? Remember, we can use both preferences, but usually one of them is our most innate preference. Now, my son Jack is a judging type, and he enjoys structure and organisation and wants the problem-solving process to demonstrate closure. He likes to identify possible defects and follow the steps during implementation. He believes that evaluation is necessary for the effectiveness and efficiency. However, poor Jack, the rest of our family are perceiving types, and we prefer flexibility and adaptability. We like to consider a variety of techniques that are flexible and adjustable, and we like to provide for unforeseen change in the problem-solving process. Which one feels right for you? As you can see, there are many different things about our personality which influence our decision-making processes, let alone other external factors that impact our lives. Most of the time, kids these days don't have the knowledge about how the real world works. Many forms of problem-solving are not taught, understood, or used in schools or home. But kids need life skills to use when they're out there in the real world. I'm Kate Mason, and this is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today we're talking to Kim Hopkins. Kim is an independently licensed clinical social worker who specialises in working with behaviourally challenged kids for more than 20 years. She has been a collaborative and proactive solutions trainer since 2007. Kim helps parents, caregivers and teachers change their interactions with children, focusing on problem solving, not modifying behaviours. Welcome to the show, Kim. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's go back in time. And can you tell us where your driving passion and your desire to help kids and their caregivers began?
Sure. Well, if we go way back, I was always one that people came to with their problems. I was always told I was a good listener, and I just loved working with kids and families. My father wanted me to be a pediatrician, but I was not so hot on blood and stuff. So instead, I took the social work route. I was trained much like many other clinicians are trained in terms of traditional rewards and consequences. This is the way we help kids. I was working in residential care. We were noticing that that traditional way of helping kids was not working. If kids made gains with us, they were not sustaining those gains when they stepped down to a less restrictive setting, or they went home, or they went from our therapeutic day school back to their home schools. They often lost the gains they made. And a lot of kids that did make gains, they didn't sustain even while with us. Also, we were restraining kids a lot. This was a long time ago when you could restrain kids for reasons you can't today. Thankfully, we're moving in a good direction. And, so we were just sort of scratching our heads, like what we're taught to do doesn't seem to be working. And what's that about? At the same time that we were having these thoughts, the state I was working in, Massachusetts, was recontracting with providers like us, and they were asking providers to subscribe to an evidence-based portable treatment model. Portable meaning that it didn't just work in residential care with lots of adults around, that it could also be something that parents could do, schools could adopt, right? And that did not describe our current model. So we needed to look for something anyway. And it was just serendipity that a colleague of mine said, hey, if you need credits for your license, go hear this guy, Dr. Ross Green, speak. He's a great speaker. And he was speaking not far from me, about an hour and a half north in Freeport, Maine, which is the home of LL Bean and some really great shopping. So I said, well, if he's terrible, I'm just going to leave early and go shopping. But he was not terrible. He was the opposite of terrible. And within 15 minutes, I had found the answer to everything my organization was grappling with, even though that's not what I was going there to have happen. So that began this very long journey of making a 180-degree shift from, how I was told why kids do bad things to the CPS lenses, the collaborative and proactive solution lenses of kids do well if they can, and really changing our interventions based on that new understanding. And I've been doing it ever since. Working for Dr. Green now 16 years, and having the pleasure of teaching parents and educators and clinicians a different, more productive way of thinking about kids and working with kids.
So the children that you were working with were obviously fairly troubled at the time. Did this make any difference to those children? Like, did you notice that impact on those children, or are you working with another different set of people when you started using it?
Yeah, no, I always say I was fortunate to kind of cut my teeth on this model with the population I was working with, because these were kids ages 12 to 21. They had been to locked hospital settings. They had been to jail. They had bounced around from placement to placement. They had given up on themselves, and many adults had given up on them. Layers and layers of trauma, all kinds of things, right? And when we shifted our lenses to kids do well if they can, and believed that they wanted to do well and they were perfectly motivated, they didn't look it, and they tried to convince us that they weren't, but that was just a defense mechanism. And once we believed that, we saw different kids. It's a terrible way to describe it, but it's very accurate. Kids who kind of looked kind of dead in their eyes came back to life because it was hope. We restored hope that things could be different from that for them by understanding them differently, and not just thinking, oh, we haven't found how to motivate them. We believed they were motivated, and then we looked at they were lacking skills, and that's why things are not going well. Let's start partnering with them to help them solve the problems that they don't have the skills to solve themselves. And then in doing that, you could see them start to gain skills, and we started extinguishing behavior, and there came that spark in the eyes. They were hopeful. We were changing their lives, and finally, at long last, understanding them and what they needed.
That's huge.
It was incredible.
How great for you to see the result through that lens, and how great for them to be able to move forward with their lives. That must have felt so awesome for you, because working, like you say, and coming up against a brick wall all the time and nothing really happening, to something life-changing like that, that's amazing. So how did you move on from that kind of area? Did you move into a different workplaces? How did you go into working with parents and things like that? What did that happen there?
Yeah. Well, I had certainly used the model with parents in residential care. I was doing some family work, although I started to move more into a training role and less direct service to be able to spread the model. We had 12 programs in our organization, so trying to teach everyone to change their lenses. And then when I was about to get married, I kind of started to realize that I was working a lot of hours and I was on call, and it just wasn't conducive to starting a family. So a colleague of mine said, well, why don't you call up Dr. Green and tell him you're really good at his model and see if he needs help? And I was like, I can't do that. But I did. I emailed him, and it turned out he had a project not far from where I lived. And that kind of started me working with parents, working with all kinds of people. Police actually is part of that project. And then things just sort of grew from there. And we began to think about what resources can we put together for parents and others who want to learn the model. It's a little bit hard to learn at first because it is, for some like me, a 180-degree shift from how we were taught to be helpful. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all started. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, and it's a massive behavioural change and headspace change to do that type of thing. You really have to be sure that you'd want to do it, I think, because you'd have to stick with it with the whole force, wouldn't you? So can you tell us what it is? What is collaborative and proactive solutions? How does that model work? And if it's easier, can you tell us how we might use it at home, since
Sure.
we're at home?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things about the CPS model that differentiate it from other models. First off, the focus in the CPS model is on problems and solving them, not on behavior and modifying behavior. And a lot of models are focused on what kind of behavior are we seeing, and what's the target, and what's the frequency, and what's the severity, right? We don't focus on behavior. Behavior to us is just a signal. It's just sort of the fever that we need to look deeper, right? So we call this an upstream model, and that's loosely based on a fable where there's a community that lives downstream and a community that lives upstream. In the downstream community, they look over in the water because people are screaming for help, and they go, oh my gosh, people are drowning. We need to mobilize and save them. And, they're exhausted and they're not saving everyone. They're doing the best they can. But what they don't do is kind of dry off and walk upstream and say to the upstream community, how come people who cannot swim keep falling in the water? And so when kids are doing their behavior, they're in the water. And a lot of models are focused on how do you try to throw them a life preserver that they'll grab onto, right? Our model says, the best work happens when you dry off and you go upstream and you figure out what pushed them in the water in the first place. And what you'll find upstream are problems that they didn't have the skills to solve. And that is based on almost 60 years of research that is slowly making its way into mainstream, where kids who exhibit frustration in the face of problems that they can't solve, it's because they lack the skills to do it differently. They lack the skills to adapt. They're lacking frustration tolerance skills, problem skills, adaptability skills, social skills. There's a whole bunch that the research says these kids don't have. And so when we start looking at them that way, like, oh, this is a skills deficit, not a motivation deficit, then we can intervene with them differently. Our model is also very much about working proactively with kids. This is something we're doing with kids. We view kids as our partners, even the young ones, because they actually have information that we can't observe in terms of how they perceive the situation, what they're thinking about it, which if we had that information, that would help us be the kind of helpers we want to be and help solve problems durably. This model is also, again, very proactive in nature. The best time to solve problems is not when kids are drowning in the water. So we really do want to allocate time differently when things are calm to be able to talk through what's hard about solving a problem, which is also synonymous with meeting an expectation. An unsolved problem, an unmet expectation, same thing. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, we believe that kids do well if they can, which is very different than how I was taught. I was taught kids do well if they wanna. And if they want to do well, they do well. And if they don't want to do well, they don't. And our role as helpers is to make them wanna. I have to tell you, I was in the make them wanna business for a long time. In residential care, back in the 90s, we could make kids wanna in some pretty significant creative ways. We could keep them from seeing their families. We could use seclusion. We could use restraint. We could do all kinds of unpleasant stuff. And they still didn't do well, at least not long term, right? And we also believe that doing well is preferable to not doing well. Why wouldn't a kid want to do well? They suffer more than anybody else, right? They're not waking up in the morning thinking at 10:15 today, I am going to throw my breakfast across the kitchen and swear at my parents. And yet it's happening, and they know it shouldn't happen. So it's time to get curious. What is getting in the way? So that's what we want to think. If this kid could do well, she'd be doing well. If she's not doing well, what is getting in the way? We want to think about lagging skills leading to unsolved problems. Figure that out. We have an assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. It's not as difficult as it might sound. It's a one-page piece of paper that helps you figure out, like, okay, when does this all play out? You know, we like to say you want to answer the two important questions. Why are kids exhibiting behavior when there's frustrations, right? And when does this play out, right? And so if we can figure that out, we can make the kid predictable, which is good because that's going to help us get proactive. It's also going to help us see that if our kids have lots and lots of unsolved problems, which some kids do, there's nothing out there that's going to take care of that all at once. So once we have the lay of the land, we can figure out what are our high priorities, because that's what we want to work on first to get solved. Everything else, we're going to want to find a way to kind of tamp it down. We're going to want to stabilize the situation, prioritize things, and give ourselves permission to do that, because I think there's a lot of pressure that as parents, we have to have our kids functioning perfectly right away. And actually, we need to give ourselves permission to not pursue every expectation the kid can't meet. That's about being smart and strategic. We're going to work on our high priorities. We're going to get those problems solved durably. Once those are solved, we'll then take something that we put on ice, move it over, and we'll problem solve that. And that's kind of the basics. I mean, there are 3 steps that we used to solve problems. We call it Plan B. There's tons of free resources on our website, which is livesinthebalance.org, to learn the detail of how do we actually use that assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems to get everything started. And then how do we actually use the 3 steps of CPS or Plan B to start getting problems solved. So there's videos, there's stuff you can download, and it's the whole model is there for free. I hope people will check it out to learn more.
We hear about happy, cohesive, productive teams, but do they exist, or are they a figment of a manager's imagination? Well, yes, they do. And I can help you make this happen. If you're ready to get your team working as one, contact me at thepersonalitycoach.com.au. So if I was to do it at home, let's say a situation, people on phones or something like that, you know, getting your child off a phone or whatever, how would you broach that when you've got someone's, because we all do at the moment, you know, like you sit there and you go, yes.
Yes, especially those screens. They are very seductive, aren't they?
Very.
They're among
very
some of the hardest problems to solve, doable, but just challenging. But the first thing that we would say to parents is get clear on your expectation. We often know what we don't want to see, right? But let's get clear on what we would actually like. Like, is it, and I'm not telling you what it should be. I don't, you know, it depends on your kid and your household and all of that, right? Lots of factors. But sometimes we want to say something like difficulty ending screen time after 2 hours, or difficulty waiting until homework done to use the computer, or, and whatever it might be, whatever fits your household. That's not for me to say, right? But for you to kind of figure out, what do I want to see? That's the starting point. So then we would say to the child, to kick off this process, you seem to have difficulty waiting until your homework is done to use your computer. What's going on? And now we're trying to get information from them. This is the first step, called the empathy step. We're trying to get information from them so we can fully, clearly understand how this gets off track, right? So we might hear things like, well, I like to play, for older kids, maybe I like to play live video games with other people, and the people I like to play with only play at a certain time. And, so I jump on because I want to play with them, kind of thing. Or sometimes we hear things about pausing and having a hard time ending a game if it's not finished. And actually one I heard this week was, I jump on the computer early because I'm worried my sister will get there first, and then she's going to log into my account and she's going to destroy my Minecraft city.
Wow.
Sometimes we say be prepared for surprises. You do not know what's going on in the inner world. That's what you're trying to figure out. Now knowing that, we can help her solve the problem in a way that meets the parent's concerns. So the first step, which takes the longest, because we really do want to understand thoroughly where the kid is coming from, and if you have a kid who talks, they might not lay it all out for you. They might talk very surface information. You really want depth of information. So you go, okay, aha, now I get what's happening here. After you've had that kind of light bulb moment, you kind of summarize everything you've heard from the kid and then ask if there's anything else that gets in the way. If the kid says, no, that's it, you can move on to the second step, which is much shorter. It's one sentence, maybe two, where you get to say your worry in the situation. Not your expectation now, it's your worry. What's important about this to you? And so you might say something like, my concern is I'm worried that if we're not prioritizing homework, you might fall behind in school and in your learning. And so we would say that, and now we're on to step 3 already. So step 1 takes a while, step 2 short, step 3, we sort of want to pair those two things together. I wonder if this is the invitation step. I wonder if there's a way where we could help you when you're worried that your sister will log on to your account and ruin your Minecraft city, in such a way that you're not falling behind in your schoolwork, right? So I'm using the exact language. Kids' concern goes first, then mine, because the way we traditionally parent, we don't even know what the kid's concern is, and it's all about the adult, and we win, right? So every step of the way, we're saying, no, we're really hearing you, and we want to come up with a solution that you like too. Because even though I'm not a big video game person, so it's hard for me to care about your Minecraft city, but I don't have to care about it. I don't have to love it. I just have to honor it as real. Then I can request that you, kid, can honor my concern as real. You might not care about falling behind in school, but you don't need to. It's my concern. So then we're giving equal weight to these two concerns and giving the kid first crack at, how do we solve these? How do we find something that works for both of us? But you're the partner. If they can't come up with anything, you can make a suggestion and see what they think. And then you agree to try a solution that seems to be feasible, doable, and meets both sets of concerns, not just one of the concerns, but both. And then you try it out and see how it goes and come back together. And that's kind of the simplified version of the process.
Cool. That's great. And all of these things are, you learn, you make your mistakes, don't you, as you go along, I can imagine. Some things will work out and some won't. And a lot of the time I do say to people that kids will forgive mistakes. If you can forgive mistakes yourself, they can forgive mistakes as well, as long as it's seen to be fair for them and for both of you. Because you have to be in a fairly calm state, I guess, too, when you're having this conversation, because you don't want to be irate at the time, because I could imagine that could blow out big time. So are you finding that these days, as a result of all of us helicopter and snowplow parents, do children have less problem-solving abilities, because I know that because I've always prepared meals for my family, my guys have never really had to prepare anything. And a few years ago, I asked my son to put a roast in the oven out of the fridge. And I got home and I instructed him on the phone, and I got home and the plastic was melted all over the roast, right? And I couldn't get angry. I never taught him that you don't put a roast in with plastic wrap on the top. That's actually to keep it fresh while it's in the fridge. So we went out for dinner that night. But it is actually looking at what do we teach our children these days. There's a lot of time we don't allow them to solve problems or to think about things. We take things right out of their hands. And nope, don't worry, we'll fix that. So do you think there is a lot more of that today? Sorry, bit of a story there, but
yeah, I don't necessarily know why it exists, but certainly we are big fans of you got to teach him to fish, not just give him the fish, right? Because that's how we're going to teach the necessary skills of collaboration, of resolving disagreements without conflict, right? Of perspective taking and all these things that employers want their employees to have, right? Things that we want them to go out in the world and have. But if we are not involving them in solving the problems that affect their own lives, we're not teaching them to fish, can actually end up making things worse. We can actually end up being adversaries instead of partners. We are not breeding honesty when we do things that way. So we like to say, start as early as possible with collaborating with your child, even with young ones, little ones. And there's ways to collaborate even if language is an issue or cognitive ability is an issue or age is an issue, that you can modify the model for any situation. But yeah, you definitely want to involve kids in solving problems that affect their own lives. It's the only way to teach them how to do it. The 3 steps of the model are not secret. We want kids to know them because we want kids, you want to be fired as the problem-solving tour guide. We want kids to take these skills, these 3 steps, and apply them when you're not around. And that's not going to happen after your 5th Plan B CPS conversation, but it will happen, and it's really neat when it does.
And nothing happens in a hurry, really, in that sense. I get you totally. So the thing is that if we make an effort to go through that, there's a whole lot of stuff online that you've got available on the website, and that any other information we're going to put below in the show notes. But I really want to thank you for sharing that, because as parents of my generation, we were very much of the, what did you say, the reward consequence behaviours. And the turnaround is massive, and it's really interesting for me, to sit and watch the changes. And I think that they are amazing and very, very important in bringing our kids up. So thank you for being with me today. I've had a wonderful time listening to you, and I'm sure that a lot of people will really love the knowledge you've given us.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
So when talking to your child, here are some questions that might be helpful in starting a conversation. How are you feeling lately? Can you tell me more about what's going on in your life? What do you think might help? Is there anyone that you'd like to talk to about the problems you're facing? How can I support you right now? Is there anyone that you trust to talk to about what's going on? And finally, do you feel heard and understood? It's important to remember that every situation is unique and to adjust your approach accordingly. It's also important to seek professional help if the situation becomes too overwhelming. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia and Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonialitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and thanks for listening.